I'd like to open in prayer with one of your wonderful women saints and that is Bridget of Kildare. We arise today through a mighty strength, God's power to guide us, God's might to uphold us, God's wisdom to teach us, God's eyes to watch over us, God's ear to hear us, God's word to give us speech, God's hand to guard us, God's way to lie down before us, God's shield to strengthen us, shelter us, and God's host to secure us. She lived about 450 to 523. That is from the Abbey in Ireland. And I think she's known for the Lake of Beer. We always love Bridget. She's one of our saints first, but obviously she wouldn't be here without all the Roman Catholic Church work. Russ asked me to be here because of my interest and passion for Bible women. And I do love them. As this time got closer, I have 27 pages of notes here. I've told Russ, don't worry, we won't get to all of them. But they are my passion. I started out writing for my children, writing the great Bible stories. I would write the story from the point of view from the spy on Noah's Ark, working for the Federal Birds of Investigation, and being the lion, why he didn't eat Daniel in the lion's den, things like that. And then I progressed on to women of the Bible. So my plan for this morning is we'll look at the women of Lent and Easter, because how can you have the women of Lent without the women of Easter to see the whole story? Mary and Martha of Bethany, we'll have some small group time. Then we'll look at Mary, Jesus's mother, and Mary Magdalene, otherwise known as Mary Magdalene. I noticed on your wonderful website, you refer to her consistently as Mary of Magdalene, and that's great. Have some small group time there, and then draw some conclusions at the end. And I hope that when you leave here today, I hope that not only will you be inspired from some particular instance of these women in the Bible, but that we'll also learn from each other. Bible study in groups that's where you learn stuff, and that's where people share stuff. And it always amazes me how freely people share in small groups. And so hope that works well for you. So why these four? Well, all of them were in Jesus's life the weeks before he died. Clearly, they were in his life at the tomb and at the resurrection and after that. All four of these women opened their hearts to Jesus. They said yes in their own way, yes to joy, yes to grief, or when you say yes to love and joy, there's often grief there, but especially for these four, there was. Yes to telling the story, his story. Without saying yes, would we even have a Jesus on this earth as we know him? We wouldn't have the same Jesus. We don't know what God's other plan was, if there was one. But Mary, his mother, all human beings have free will. She could have run away. She could have said no. She said yes to bearing Jesus. God always gives us choices. And that's saying yes to love, being open to that, saying, yes, God, I will do what you wish. I will be your willing servant. We are in debt to her, obviously, forever. And of course, the apostles, the 12 apostles, were clearly highly important. They left their homes and their businesses to walk with Jesus. They saw his miracles. They camped out with him overnight. They went hungry. No doubt they went thirsty. They sheltered Jesus. They proclaimed the gospel. And most of them lost their lives in the service of the Lord they had so loved. But these women, these four women, stepping into their stories is a whole new way, because the church has overlooked their stories for years. It's a whole new look at Jesus in terms of intimacy, vulnerability, and friendship. We see more about Jesus from his interactions with them, and we see how drawn they were to him. They were there in a way that the men were not. Clearly, men were key and essential, but perhaps the women are the real heroes of this season. So let's take Mary of Bethany first. And remember, you have your chat. You ask questions. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. Now, there are several people in the Bible, different stories about women pouring oil on Jesus's feet. One was a sinful woman. The other one was supposedly a woman we didn't know then as Mary of Bethany in John's gospel. I'm following John's gospel today on this and working with Mary of Bethany as the one who poured oil on his feet. In a nutshell, Mary did the pouring of the oil scandalously, and Mary, in the shortest sentence in the Bible, brought Jesus to tears in pain after Lazarus died, and he saw how distressed she was. He didn't cry when he saw Martha was depressed, but that sentence is, as I'm sure you know, Jesus wept when he saw Mary's pain. In the Bible, Mary of Bethany's story is found in Luke 10, John 11, John 12. She is, as I think you probably know, a woman of great spiritual depth and compassion, a person known for her wonderfully deep listening skills. She is the one when you have a woman, if you have somebody in your life that has died, she'd be the one you want to be with, I think. A sorrow-filled, heartbroken woman after her brother Lazarus dies, and a woman who seems to have a particularly high emotional capability, and one who resonates with Jesus on a soul level. She loved him dearly. Other women and lots of men did too, but Mary's got this resonance with Jesus that almost nobody else had. People had different resonance with him in different way, but she's right there with Jesus. And from my book, the Bible Women, All Their Words and Why They Matter, where we looked at every woman whose words are recorded in the Bible, and we did a profile on each woman. There's 98. Oh, let me just get this up here. Bible Women, All Their Words and Why They Matter. Take a guess at how many words Mary Bethany had. Russ, is that chat going? Let's get that chat up. Is it working?
It is, yes. The chat is open.
And you know how to use the chat? People, it's down at where? On the right hand there, Russ?
Yeah, it's down in the
Got it.
bottom, probably towards the left-hand side near the middle. Yeah.
So guess how many words she said? Mary Bethany, 14, 200. So we have quite a range here, 14, 30, 10. Angela, I love your enthusiasm. But the ones who guess lowest, they've got the number right. She spoke 12 words, and here's what they were. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's all we hear from Mary in her spectacular presence in the Bible, 3 Gospels, and especially in the Gospel of John. AM is right. Few words. That's a very few words. Mary and her sister Martha are standout figures in the New Testament, for they provided Jesus a place of healing and shelter and respite. It was a home that he and the disciples returned to regularly, and especially the week before the Passover. Although Mary seems to get more positive press than Martha, I hate it when there's a book out there called Being a Martha in a Mary World. And I'm thinking, I'll get to Mary and Martha in a minute, but I think Mary and Martha were indisputably valuable to Jesus. So picture the setting, if you would, of their home. It's in Bethany, which is 2 miles west of Jerusalem. I think some of you probably even visited there. It is on the western side, which would put it 2 miles closer to the Mount of Olives. And 2 miles away from where Jesus was crucified. And he did ascend from Bethany. So we'll get to that in a minute. The Bible is clear that Martha owned the home. No mention of a husband for Martha and Mary. It was Martha's home. It's not clear if their brother Lazarus lived there, but he was nearby. But here's what I want you to picture. What I found when researching what their house would have been like. It was mostly a hard-packed dirt floor, so they could sweep it, but it would be a dirt floor, hard-packed, probably 2 stories high, part of a square block of dwelling that shared an inner courtyard for cooking and socializing. fronting onto a hard-packed street. Streets out front, the houses are around a square normally, and that's where people got to know each other, and probably also where they had some water perhaps, although water wells were normally outside the village. I'm betting there was one close. But if you picture Jesus being in this house, if you picture walking by the front of the house or the back of the house at night, I see light and I hear laughter, and I see a place for Jesus to just let down and be himself. You know, they're scruffy guys, they're dirty guys, they're coming in from the road. Jesus is doing incredibly serious work, but I picture this as a time for him to just relax, have some wine, have a good dinner, have a safe place to sleep, clean blanket, clean linens, just to be himself. And yes, I really do think that there was laughter coming out of that home. And I do believe it's no accident that Jesus ascended from Bethany. There's really no other reason that I can see why he would have gone to Bethany. It's a short walk from Jerusalem. I mean, it's the home of Mary and Martha. I believe he went there to say goodbye before the ascension. You know, when you think about it, what were those last few hours before he ascended? Did he sit down at the table and have a meal with Mary and Martha? You know, Mary's not going to let him go to the next life, probably without a good meal. And so I'd like you to share with you what Mary's thoughts may have been as she anointed Jesus. My way of getting into Bible stories themselves is to put myself in place there. And there's an old adage that we used in writing Bible women, and that's stories don't tell us what is true, they tell us what must be true. Putting yourself in the place of these Bible women and their stories, it's kind of like going to a family reunion. I think listening to relatives, elders talk, remembering things about the past. You may not even like one of them, but I'm guessing you're going to be apt to hear their stories. And so to walking into the stories of the characters in the Bible, for me, it's the best way to get to it. So here's what Mary may have thought. His feet drew my attention like bees to nectar. No one had paid attention to them like a good host should. They were dirty, scuffed, full of calluses and a few blisters. The more I stared at those dirty feet, the more I wanted to make things right. And then I remembered we had nard, spikenard. All conversation stopped behind me as I uncorked the jar. The aroma filled the house, clean, deep, evocative, sensual, calling all of us to something higher, better, more than we could be on our own. I rubbed the oil into Jesus's feet, every pore, every toe, each ankle, each instep. And with that, I began to cry. Wouldn't you? This man was so dear to me, and now he was wanted. Probably soon to be tracked down, probably killed. When I reached for a towel to wipe both his feet and my eyes, there was none. So I used the closest thing, my hair. Carefully, gently, I wiped the oil from every inch of Jesus's feet. Never had I done anything so carefully. Never had I done anything so holy. Never had I loved so much. A voice shattered the silence. Judas. Judas yelling. Judas furious, saying the money that bought the spikenard would be better spent on the poor. He got me. I thought about that. Of course, he's right. But then one more voice, a tender one, a voice I will never forget, cut in. Leave her alone. Let her keep it for the day of my burial. The poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. Mary has done well by me. And you know, it's easy for this story to be overlooked, but I do believe that it is the most sensual moment in the whole Bible. There is nothing else like it. First, women did not sit at the foot of rabbis. They normally did what Martha was doing, making a meal, perhaps doing a little cleaning in the background, making a home, making sure everybody's got what they need. And there was nothing wrong with that. As you remember, that was Simon Peter's mother-in-law greatest gift. She was healed. She was able to get back to serving those she loved. The verb there is diakonia. It's the same one used for deacons later on in the Bible in Acts, diakonia. But anointing Jesus's feet with heavily scented oil. Maybe some of you get massages. I hope so. Maybe some of you massage someone you love. But we can just imagine Mary here. Every drop of oil is a loving touch. And then wiping the oil off Jesus's feet with her hair. Something to think on, I think. Why do gifts from the Magi at the beginning of Jesus's life capture almost all Christians when we hear the story? You know, we listen to that. We think about the Magi, where they were from. We all know the three gifts. Most of us know the three gifts. And that moment is savored in the life of the church, but this moment is pretty much overlooked. Jesus didn't care about the gifts being an infant, those first three gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but he clearly cared about the holy oil on his feet. I do believe that this moment transformed him and gave him strength to walk to the cross. For what do we use oil for? We use it for holy unction at the last somebody's life. We use it when somebody's going on a journey often. And we use it for the anointing of kings, don't we? Back in Saul's time, David's time, Solomon's time, we use it for the anointing of kings. So Mary has nailed all of these. The word nails there, nails on the cross. Mary has got all of these moments, going on a journey, holy unction at the end of somebody's life, or healing, and then anointing for a king. She has nailed all of those things in just that one moment. And I think that's just outstanding. What's your thought on Mary of Bethany? Has she come to you before? Do you have a special relationship with her? She stood out before? Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. And then we will look at Martha of Bethany. But Simon's mother-in-law passage was mistranslated, and I've been told she didn't minister to Jesus, but joined his ministry, became part of his ministry. That's a great thought, Jeff. I hadn't heard that part that she went on. In fact, I think his wife, her daughter went on to do ministry. But life of service, whether on the road or in the home, certainly would have been diaconia. Beautiful to bring this passage about the anointing forward as you are doing. Isn't spikenard also a sedative to help Jesus manages to come? Wow, I hadn't heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised. We do know that it came from high up in the Himalayas, and that's probably why it was so expensive. But that is an interesting thought, a sedative to help him manage what is to come. Wouldn't that be something? Kathy Bell says, I wish I would be more like her, contemplative. Don't we all? Don't we all? Kind of Mary's the one that I'm trying my thing for Lent. And I thank all of you Catholics, because when we were growing up, Protestant, Episcopal, we're right in the middle, you know, the via media, the road. We always got fish sticks for lunch on Friday in our public school system with tater tots. So I thank all of you for that. Where did I get off on that one? I don't know. Kathy says she's a woman of great faith and uplifting sensitivity to compassion. Mary is a model of love, attentive to Jesus, good listener, believe deeply. That is also true. And she had the confidence to sit at Jesus's feet. I love this scene, but always felt bad for Martha. So did I. She answers that Jesus is the Messiah when questioned after her brother's death, and fed them all when they came home, dropped into her home. Yes. Woman overcoming with great love, and Mary sitting at Jesus's feet is the action of a close disciple. She just did it because she was a close disciple. It is the action of a close disciple. And the question from Jeff, might Mary of Bethany be the same person as Mary Magdalene, Mary the Tower? Jesus gave everyone descriptive nicknames. His love for both of them suggested that. And there are women in the New Testament that they're evocative and they are sensual. There's the sinful woman who anointed Jesus's feet in one of the Gospels. There's the mysterious woman, and then there is Mary of Bethany. There are questions about that. Different scholars have said different things. My research, I'm going with the story, and I'm taking John at his word that it's Mary and Martha of Bethany that's Mary having this great moment. And yes, Mary affirms the gift and power of touch. That is so true. Lots of times I can't sleep, and I'm lucky enough to get a back rub then, and the whole oxytocin hormone is released, I believe, and we can sleep. So you have a chance to get a back rub, professionally or personally, go for it. That's what I always say. And Marianne makes a priest, prophet, and king anointing as Jesus was indeed RCIA. I don't know what that means. Confirmation, baptism, ordination, anointing of the sick. We share the same sacraments, don't we? And 7 sacraments. And yes, Mary saw all that. In some ways, I guess you could say she was being a priest to him. We are taught to serve the poor, but first and foremost to serve Jesus as Mary did. That's absolutely right. And that is where, when we start to talk about Martha of Bethany, we will see that that's what Jesus was calling her on. Not loving her less, but just calling her a little bit. Yes, a priest to him. Thank you, Jeff. So we will have some time for small groups after we look at Martha of Bethany. Yes, thank you. Rite of Christian initiation of adults. Thank you. Our language is a little different in the Episcopal Church and Roman Catholic Church, but we have the same big ideas. So, and we continue to be grateful for you, for all of your work and hard work and ministry and passion. I'm looking more and more into those women saints, and that was all the Roman Church from early on, and the Greek Orthodox. I love seeing Mary Bethany as one of the prophetic anointing women, similar to Mark 14:3-9. Absolutely. I love that a woman is administering the oil. This does not happen now. Men ordain men. And I hope and pray that changes for you. And I know you all are hard working on it. I know you're all in agreement on it. I've had the great honor and privilege to be ordained for 40 years now. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary if we're ordaining women to the priesthood. And I know that I hope, I pray you'll join us there one day, for there are so many gifts that are able to be administered as a priest. So we are grateful to our Episcopal brothers and sisters. Thank you. So let's go ahead and let's move on to Mary of Bethany. I learned from comments. I learned from what all of you are thinking. Mary's choice not to chat with the disciples, to sit at the feet of Jesus, unafraid of his power, but seen as an invitation. And isn't that the way Jesus wanted it? He always wanted his power as an invitation. I just have to take some few notes as we're working together. And the prophetic anointing women in Matthew and Mark anointed Jesus' head as the king. Yes. Thank you. Sinful woman. Yes. All right, let's go back to with one more question, because we're doing well on time. What might Mary of Bethany bring you that you could incorporate into your own life? That you might hope to incorporate into your life? Contemplation, quiet time, listening. We always want to see what we could learn from these women. Courage of her strong belief. Tenderness and compassion. Balance. Yes. Yes. Thank you. All right, let's take a look at Mary of Bethany. As we go on, I'm throwing my notes on the floor, just so you know. Being more incarnational and appreciation of the body. Yes. Didn't wait to be invited. Russ, would you send me the chat after this? Because I think there's some good ideas in there. I'd like to have them for my own notes. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll share it with the group too.
Great. Ministry to those on a journey. Yes. All right. Let's take a look at Martha of Bethany. So take a deep breath here to change the focus a little bit, as Mary of Bethany would be reminding us to do. I may have mentioned, or I started to mention, that my discipline in Lent, before I got up on the fish sticks, I used to meditate every day. So clearly, Mary Bethany is a great inspiration for that. Jesus is approachable. Do not be afraid. Listening and openness to experiencing Jesus firsthand. Yes, Jesus is approachable, and that's what he always wanted to be. Maybe the women of the Bible make him more approachable because they're approaching him in a different kind of way. Look at the Samaritan woman by the well, who he talked to more. That's the longest conversation that anybody in the Bible had with Jesus. That certainly was an invitation, and that's for another day, but she came on in her own, strong and argumentative and awesome and tired, careworn. I'm working on another retreat where I'm working on middle-aged and older women and being shining lights in the Bible. That's what I think of when I think of the Samaritan woman. Okay, I'm getting off track here. Listening and openness to experiencing Jesus firsthand. Let's start with Mary of Bethany. Yes, Shannon. In a nutshell, Martha of Bethany was highly gifted in the ministry of hospitality. And I know you know people like that. Perhaps an aunt, perhaps a grandmother, perhaps a neighbor. You go to their house and it may not be picked up all the way, but you walk in there and you know that that's a place where you can relax, things are taken care of. Just type in the chat bar. Would you just lift up who you have a friend like that? In the meantime, Rita is saying she confronted Jesus, reminding me that any conversation with Jesus is valuable even when I'm angry. Just pop in the chat. Who is the greatest minister of hospitality in your life? You walk into their house, you're completely cared for, let your hair down. They've thought of most everything. Pop them in the chat. My husband's mother, isn't that nice? Terry, Elizabeth, my mother and grandmother saw every guest of Jesus. I love that. She happens to be named Martha. Grandmother, Martha, Mary. So we all have those people in our lives. And you can tell when you walk into somebody's house that she's like Martha of Bethany. And Jesus was invited to Martha's house, but clearly he found a friend there. My friend Elena, my grandmother, mother, former neighbor, Marianne, friend. Those people, I think, they're not common. They're few and far between. If you can name them off just like this, and the names in here and the names that are in your own heart, we just lift them up and say thanks to God for their wonderful presence in your life. So, Doherty family blessing, Aunt Madeline, yes. In a nutshell, Mary was highly gifted in the ministry of hospitality. She made sure all the details were taken care of when Jesus is visited. She did more than that. She had 2 strong, honest exchanges with Jesus that we will look at in just a moment. Kathy says, anyone could pop into my mom's house and feel loved. What a blessing that is. Martha of Bethany's first honest exchange with Jesus, I'm sure she had many, was when she complained to Jesus. And we'll look at that in just a minute. The first one, Martha, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Martha complained to Jesus that Mary wasn't helping enough when she had all those people over at her house, wasn't helping enough to make dinner. And the time she called Jesus to bring her brother Lazarus back to life. But first she called him to heal her brother Lazarus. Jesus didn't get there in time. He died, Lazarus died. 4 days later, Jesus shows up. 4 days. Martha was pretty upset about that, and God bless her for just saying what she thought. Martha's story is found in Luke 10, verses 38 to 42, John 11, 1 to 44, and John 12, verse 2. Who was she? I always like to ask who these people were before we get into study. Think of them as your neighbors. If you had a neighbor down the street, you could characterize that person. That's what we did for our book, Bible Women. Thought if she were our neighbor, what would we see in her? And for Martha of Bethany, we saw a woman living with her sister and Mary, brother Lazarus in the village of Bethany. Saw a homemaker creating a warm and loving place for Jesus to visit. She loved being a minister of hospitality. We have this new dog now. Our old dog was an Aussie, full-blown Australian Shepherd. He died 4 years ago. Our hearts have finally healed. That's why we have this new dog. But he was the minister of the hospitality on the street. Those of you who had dogs knew who I want. They all need a job. He was the minister of hospitality. Martha of Bethany was a close friend of Jesus, and she was an honest woman, not afraid to confront Jesus or express her feelings about her sister. Do you have other things you'd like to say about Martha? Or we look at her story, like who she was, who she represents to you, what you might have seen in her? What adjectives you might use to describe her? And that's okay. I know they'll come up in a minute. And Jeff wants to know if there's more words and stories about Martha in the non-canonical scriptures. Jeff, I concentrate on the Bible because we're pretty much biblically illiterate in our country. So there are more stories. I think there's a gospel written about her, but I am not an expert on that. Antando, she's a practical woman, made meals for neighbor who was sick, visit the elderly. Years ago, I read a story about Martha being so annoyed with Jesus after saying, Martha, Martha, that she threw her stew pot out the window. He then went to her cooking pot to ask if he'd help peel more onions. Well, that's quite a story. Not quite in the Bible. Great story, though. She expressed her love and faith through her cooking and hospitality. Busy, organized, detailed, efficient. Always seems to be second place women. Welcoming simply, but also attentive to each one. Martha was a priestly woman who gave the only Christological statement in the Gospel of John. Thank you, Rita. She was a woman of faith. She believed in Jesus. Thank you, everybody, for that. What did she say? I always like to look at what the women said. Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. From Luke. From John 11, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Those were her words. Her total word count is 61. For that's pretty still a small number of words. She also said, yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, coming into the world. And Lord, there's a stench because Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And thank you for your comments. Elizabeth Fiorenza, I love her, says what Jesus meant is Martha, one casserole would have been enough. Yes. And just one more comment, and then we'll look at her a little more. Like an Italian, Polish, Jewish lady of the house wearing an apron, spoke directly, bold out of love. I love that. Absolutely. Thank you, Val. Likely characteristics. How might you describe her characteristics? I would also add practical, hardworking, outspoken, domestic, hospitable, faithful, loving, tenacious. And I just like the word add that word, outspoken again, because you don't see that in the story of Martha. Gail says, deep, deep faith, strong voice. Yes. So we will I've never heard Martha rebuking in town. Interesting to consider hearing her words this way. But we'll get into that a little more. So there's 2 parts to Martha of Bethany's story. I'm calling them, of course, part 1 and part 2. Let's take the first one. Martha of Bethany has seen Jesus in town. She invites him over to dinner. That's why she goes at Martha's invitation. Martha's taking the reins here. Jesus is not asking himself to come to the house. He's not sitting outside on a bench. Can I come in? Can I come in? Of course not. He's got big things to do. He's doing those big things. And she sees him talking to a group of people. She invites him into her house, into Martha's house, okay? Now this starts after that. Part 1 of there's 2 very involved moments that I want to look at with you. Jesus and the disciples I think this is the one you know pretty clearly, are at Martha's home for dinner. Jesus and the disciples makes it at least 15 people on a dirt-packed floor. You know, people didn't have recliners and they didn't have barca loungers. They didn't have extra church pews drawn into their house. They had a lot of the guys. The custom was to eat on the floor on your side. So as we talked about, the house is small. There's couple rooms upstairs, bedrooms, I guess. And these guys have been on the road. They're probably kind of dirty and grubby. They're getting cleaned up and they're hungry. We can assume that they are maybe even a little smelly. Martha is working so hard to prepare a wonderful dinner for these guys off the road, at least 15. Apparently more than one course. Probably could have been fish, lamb, bread, figs, dates, wine, cheese. It's all floating around. We don't know where Martha's money came from. I'm guessing she might have been a widow. And Mary of Bethany is just sitting at Jesus's feet, just listening. How would you like that in your house if you had 15 people over for dinner at the minimum, and you think you could count on your sister for a few things to help you with that, right? I mean, wouldn't you think so? I don't have a sister. I have sisters-in-laws. I have stepdaughters. I have daughters-in-laws. I'd want a little help from them, especially the girls. Okay. So Mary's not taking her eyes off Jesus, just sitting at his feet. And Martha, again, is distracted by her many tasks. She's trying to do everything. She came to Jesus and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Luke 10:40. I'd be saying this exact same thing. And what does Jesus say? Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few are needed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. I'd feel a little slapped in the face with that comment. I would put feel a little put down with that, especially if I'm the one making the meal. Although I can kind of be a martyr at the dinner table, having a lot of people over. You know, my husband says, "Oh, I always help with that." Well, he does. I want to tell you a funny story, but don't let me get too far off the wall. He does help, but I'm the one thinking about it 3 days in advance. I'm making out the list. I'm seeing, you know, those rooms that people are going to go in, and I'm thinking somebody's going to slip upstairs. How's the upstairs? Okay. So Martha's got all this stuff going on in her house. I just have to tell you this one story because we're good on time. We had the altar guild over to our house. My husband was a rector of a local church. We had the altar guild over to our house once to have tea. And it's a great idea. We got all this stuff. And my husband said, I'll vacuum the floor. Well, I have learned, he says he's going to do something, to not do it for him. He's helping. He's doing a lot. He's running a church, all this stuff. He's left the vacuuming to the last minute. Garland Carson, a woman I love dearly, she's passed away now. She was the head of the altar guild. And she came in the house. The time change had just changed that night. She comes into the house and she saw my husband Len vacuuming. And she went back to the church and said, she even makes him vacuum on top of everything else. So anyways, I get the Martha thing. I can certainly be a Martha. It's easy for me to be a Martha. And I'm not even a very good one, but I can do it, and I do it. So that's a story. At any rate, so a slap in the face, is Jesus slapping Martha in the face a little bit? We're calling her out. You know, she needs help. Mary has it right. There is much more going on here than this. And I am grateful to I read a lot of books. I read a lot of scholars, old scholars, new scholars. There's a book out, Women in the Bible, Shannon Bream. I think she's a Fox anchor. And I read her book. My brother gave it to me, and I thought, oh, great, I'll read it. What does she know? Well, it's really good, actually. And she points out that calling Martha, 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 a double name like that, is only one of 3 times that Jesus does that for people who are being called to vocation, to a vocation. It's a call to vocation. You remember the other 2? We have Simon, when Jesus tells Simon that he's prayed for him to resist temptation so that he can turn others to ministry and be the rock of the church. And in Acts, we have Jesus saying, Saul, Saul, when Saul is famously on the road to Damascus. And he too receives a big change in his vocation, a whole new life. So there's Saul, Saul, Simon, Simon, and Martha, Martha. That is a huge honor that I had overlooked before I read this woman's book. And it's really special, actually. So this for Martha is a sign of love and direction, a huge honor, a big message, calling a strong woman to a strong and demanding vocation of following Jesus and proclaiming the word. You got many things on your mind, Martha, Jesus was saying, but the one important thing is to follow me, to put God first, to listen to me, to be with me. And yes, somebody said a minute ago, one pot. Yes, that's the other translation of that. Mary has one pot. And it could, probably what Jesus is saying there is, Martha, Martha, if you'd fixed one pot for us, that would have been enough. One crock pot of the day, whatever they had back then, big bowls and a fire next to a fire, one thing. And then you could have listened to me and been with me more as well. And I just wanted to say that, yes, women as well as men are at Martha's dinner table. Yes, all the women that traveled with him, no doubt they were there as well. They could have helped. And Ann Murphy says, I've always loved Martha. I believe that the ministry of hospitality is a crucial and often underappreciated ministry in our communities. Hospitality is ultimately a way of demonstrating love. Yes, knowing what is ours to do is so important. So that's when I see that double name thing going on there, 1 out of 3 times Jesus said it in the New Testament, that's big. And it's an honor for Martha, who often gets thrown to the side over Mary. I talked about a second instance in Martha of Bethany's experience with Jesus. And this is when her brother Lazarus died. Lazarus has been sick for 4 days. He's not doing well. Hospital, place of healing. He's not doing well. Lazarus is on the point of dying. Martha of Bethany can see that he's on the point of dying. And she calls for her friend Jesus because she's seen him do miracles. She's not worried about it. Jesus will come and heal him. Well, Jesus doesn't show up. He shows up 4 days later after Lazarus is in the tomb, has been embalmed. 4 days later. Jesus had raised a woman's son in Nain earlier in his ministry, the widow of Nain. He raised her son when he happened to be walking by a town, and the widow was crying because her son had died, and he was on a bier. And Jesus walked up to him and lifted him up and raised him. So Martha may have known about that as well. But I'm sure she didn't expect that Jesus would leave her brother dead for 4 days. And so she's thinking, I'm going to tell you what a few of her thoughts might have been. Where were you? Why did you not heal Lazarus? He died, Jesus. He died. We put him away in the tomb because he's dead. How much more do I have to spell it out for that? He's in the tomb because he's dead. What's going to happen? What's going to happen there? Is Martha expecting him to raise Lazarus from the dead? I don't know. But her sense of being free to express anger shows that Jesus and Martha had a strong relationship, and that she was a blunt, honest woman trying to get to the truth and also trying to express herself, saying she was ticked off. I remember when my father died, I was driving a Volkswagen then, and I just rolled up the windows on the Volkswagen and just yelled at God right and left. And I remember thinking at the time, if our God can't handle being yelled at, how much is he worth? Kind of a sophomoric thought there. But I do still go by that, I guess, that we as human beings have always been free to yell at God, to express our, excuse me, to express our displeasure. Who's the guy in Fiddler on the Roof? Tevye? Think of how he expresses, a man of great faith. Think of how he expresses his displeasure to God. So yes, she's saying to Jesus how ticked off she is. And you know what? Jesus can take it. Jesus does take it. It sets a model for us, I think, for having a deeper relationship with God. Anger, expressing that anger, yelling, just pouring out our hearts, not only in good times, but in bad, is what I believe that Jesus wants for us. And I think we all say, where were you to Jesus's time, says Margie, and he wants a personal relationship, says Marion, and that's very true. So this is her confession of faith overlooked throughout all the ages, a lot of the ages, not all the ages, and we haven't always overlooked it, but women's words in the Bible are, little under the cloak of whatever. Martha, Lazarus would not have died if you had been here. And even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus, Lazarus will be raised up. Martha, ever practical Martha, I know, on the last day. Jesus, you don't have to wait. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. Do you believe this? And Martha, boom, confession of faith. As someone pointed out, the only confession of faith in the Gospel of John, and one of the few confessions of faith, I'll get to that in a minute, in the New Testament. Jesus, you don't have to wait. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. Do you believe this? The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. Martha, yes. All along I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who comes into the world. Boom, right there. All along I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who comes into the world. Think about how valuable Martha is. She's minister of hospitality. She's taking care of this. She's doing all these things, and she sees it clearly who Jesus is. Now, we always hear about Simon Peter's confession earlier in the Bible. I do believe there are confessions of other women that have gone under the covers, not under the covers, under the cloak of not knowing much about the women of the Bible for many people. And that is Anna in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus goes to the temple to be blessed when he is 6 weeks old. Anna has been waiting there 80 years for the Messiah, living in the temple. And she recognizes him in the temple courtyard. She's seen as the first Christian prophet. This is the Messiah, she says. And she sees him, Elizabeth, before Jesus's birth, when Mary, Jesus's mother, carries Jesus in utero. They enter Elizabeth's house in the hills, and Mary is so scared she's run off to be with her older cousin Elizabeth. And Elizabeth knows that it's the baby, it's the Messiah that Mary is carrying in her womb. And so does her. She also has a baby in the womb. It's John the Baptist. And John leaps for joy because he knows that it is the Lord that he is going to prefigure in his life. He leaps for joy to hear this voice of Mary. So he knows the Messiah is there as well. So we have these really clear instances, to me at least, of several people in the New Testament giving a confession of faith. Simon Peter gets the most credit for that, but there is this one from Martha of Bethany, and there's those other ones. Martha, all along I have believed that you are the Messiah. At the grave, okay, this is up in the hills because Martha has heard that Jesus is coming into town finally after 4 days. Martha runs out of the house, up the hills to see Jesus. They have this confession of faith. She yells at him, and they go. And then Martha runs back to the house to get her sister Mary, says, the teacher wants to see you. You better come. So Martha, Mary of Bethany, runs up to this path well trodden in the hills. And she also asks the same questions. Why? Where have you been? And when Jesus sees Mary Bethany in that instance, that's where he breaks down and cries. I do believe that is the only place where we see Jesus cry tears, except for when Jesus weeps over what's going to happen to the temple in Jerusalem, or the whole city for that matter. So they're out in the hills. They're seeing this, having this conversation with Jesus. Jesus goes to the tomb to raise Lazarus from the dead. The townspeople are there. Mary and Martha are there. Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. And then I love this comment from Martha who says, but Lord, the smell. What? She's thinking, the smell? Did I really say that? She says, the smell. He's been in there for 4 days. He's going to smell pretty bad. And you know, that is just pure Martha of Bethany, isn't it? Thinking about all those details. Thinking of what's going to happen, thinking what was going to work and what's not work. She would never have this smell in her house of the decaying body. He's going to smell. And that is so true to form. You know, often people say, well, in the Bible, did somebody write that in? Did it really happen? It's just, I tend to go straight forward with what's in the Bible. Let's take the story. Let's love it. Let's deal with it. It's in the Bible. Let's learn it and see what we can take from it. But Martha, that was no mistake. It certainly wasn't written in there by anybody else, because if you think about Martha, that's what she would have said. So Lazarus stumbles out, his eyes blinded for the light. And Martha's right. There is a horrible smell of decaying flesh, but it doesn't matter. Nothing matters right then, except for Lazarus, except for Jesus, except this. What Martha had known, that Jesus is the Messiah, has been confirmed. And she, in her ever practical, blunt way, knows it. Any questions about that meeting right there? And then we'll go on to look at Martha a little more theologically. I have to bend over and pick a piece of paper off the floor. So should I see a hand raise, or raise your hand, or Russ will see that, or write something in the chat? James
I don't
Martin,
see a hand raised.
new book on Lazarus, come forth. Oh, that looks really interesting. Okay, no hands. Any more questions or thoughts at that point? Okay. So consider this. Traditionally, Martha has been seen as rather inferior to the two of them, Martha and Mary Bethany. Let me be clear. She is not inferior. She simply takes on too much, like most of us. Jesus and his friends might have gone to that little house in Bethany once at Martha's initial invitation. But would they have returned if it was not such a place of transformation? I'm thinking of the Transfiguration on Mount Sinai, and the guys were there, Moses and Elijah and Simon, and forgetting the other one, Peter and James and John. And they were there, and that was a critical moment of transformation. But I do believe, as I mentioned before, I think that little house in Bethany was a place of transformation and renewal for Jesus. Most of what that made the renewal possible was due to Martha, the ultimate minister of hospitality. And by declaring that Jesus is Lord, especially before Lazarus is raised, Martha offers up one of the most magnificent confessions in the New Testament, just like we heard. But a final note on Martha. Tradition has it that she went on to be a missionary, traveling as far as modern-day France, intent on spreading the word about Jesus and protecting his people. That's why you see her in museums, often with a dragon at her feet. And in asperges, that is a container used to splash holy water. Maybe you get that at the Easter Vigil in your churches. We do. She is credited with saving the people of Acts in France from a dragon hiding on the banks of the Rhone River. I love that. In one of my early translations of Bible Women, I mistakenly wrote that she was credited with killing a dragon. And as one astute reader wrote back, taming dragons is a lot harder than killing them. Anybody can kill, well, not anybody can kill a dragon, but you know how we want to reach out and just kill somebody. And taming a dragon, taming a fellow disciple when they're acting badly, or if they're acting badly, taming people at church, learning how to tame people you work with, that is a much deeper skill than killing a dragon. And that's what they say about Martha. Martha, Martha, for Jesus, she would do whatever was needed to be done. Make meals, sweep the floor, shelter the disciples, proclaim Jesus as Lord, even tame dragons. And let me see. She's just, when I see her in this light, I think she's way overlooked in the life of our church. Sounds like many women of faith throughout the centuries doing what needs to be done and going beyond that. What jumps out at you regarding Martha of Bethany? Martha and Mary run like father and prodigal. Yeah. What jumps out at you, either from this conversation here, conversations and learnings that you've had in the past? Soup kitchen in all of the older women I looked over, sadly. So helpful to hear Martha commission. Yes, I agree. Grateful to the Shannon Bream for that. Soup kitchen in DC is called Martha's Table. She knew what others needed at the time. Yes. And we're back to that picture of people who have practiced hospitality in our lives. Her faith. It's amazing and wonderful. She comes across as real. She does come across as real, doesn't she? Because of both of her complaining and confronting Jesus, close enough to Jesus to be honest with him. Yes, absolutely. She wasn't in fear of Jesus, or was comfortable enough to express her opinion. And that's what Jesus wants from us. An undeterred sister. Yes. Her ministry, making a place for all, nourishing all at the table. She is transparent, honest, down-to-earth spirituality of life and practicality. And yes, a dead corpse smells it and she says it. She never sought the limelight, a true minister of hospitality. That's a really good point. There was a community of sisters of St. Martha, and one of their charisms was hospitality. They would say that life was a series of little parties. Look at Jesus. I love that. That's really neat. Love that. One of the, there's a question about where'd she get that spikenard? These two weren't rich, I don't think. They managed to have a house, but spikenard was worth up to a year's salary. So where did they find that spikenard? And I was in a Bible study group talking about some of these stories at my old parish. And there was a woman there named Harriet Smith. There's a wonderful, and Harriet Smith was practical and hospitable and had a lot of the traits of Mary of Bethany. And we were talking about where did she get the oil, because in one of my early books, I made up where she got the oil because it was part fiction. And Harriet says, I know where she got the oil. And I said, well, where did she get it? And she said, we had it for embalming Lazarus, only Martha didn't want us to use the whole thing. She wanted some left over. So maybe it had been donated by a town member or something. But I think that's probably where it came from Martha saying, no, we're going to save some of that. Lazarus doesn't need it all. We need to save it. So when Jesus says that Mary has given it to her, saved it for the day of his burial, that's pretty amazing. Wonderful painting of Martha taming the dragon. There are great paintings of Martha taming the dragon. At her feet, there lies the tamed dragon. Rita says, I believe Martha and Mary gathered with the other frightened disciples in the upper room on Easter night and received Jesus's great commissioning. You know, I'd like to believe that too. But there's no sign of that in the Bible, but that doesn't really, they certainly could have been there. Mary was there. It says that Mary's mother is there, so she was there. I'm thinking Mary and Martha would have been there too. And she had it in the house for Lazarus. Oh, interesting. James Martin says that. So that's story of Martha and Bethany, underrated and often thrown to the side. because we understand at least the meditative and contemplative actions of her sister Mary of Bethany, but she was clearly, both of these women were clearly role models that we could look up to and that we can get inspiration from. Shannon says it was a Passover, a family meal. You do not think that the gentleman prepared the food for this feast? No, I don't think so. At any rate, all right. Well, let's take, unless you have any more questions or thoughts, maybe you do, let's go into small groups, because, I learn a lot of people in small groups, and I hope you'll go to them, and I hope you'll share and you share freely. And Russ is setting them up for us. So I suggest you go, or you can take, if you'd rather be by yourself and have personal reflection time, you can take these questions and just work on them yourself. And we will come back and we will have some time for sharing before we look at Mary of Jesus's mother and Mary Magdalene. Okay, so let's come back at, see, it's 1:07 now. Let's come back at 1:25. And one question, Mary's gift of spikenard was considered extravagant, that Jesus treasured her for that gift. Is there a way? Oh, those are my questions. No wonder they sound familiar. There they are in the chat for the small groups, and Russell put us in small groups. June Ruth is going to reflect on her own. Fine. There are the questions. Mary's gift of spikenard was considered extravagant, yet Jesus treasured her for that gift. Is there a way in which you might extravagantly bless Jesus? That's for Mary. For Martha, when have you, in your personal life or in your faith community, done too much when less would have sufficed? What is the one pot, the one thing that Jesus would want you to tend to most? Okay? All right, so small groups, and we'll meet back here at 1:25. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for doing that, for either working in small groups or personally reflecting. I can see we have some Margaret Eilerman. We looks like we have a little group there right in the room. And so and I saw that there is a sister called Mary Margaret. So those names are clearly coming out of scripture, and it's good to see groups working together. And it's also nice to be in each other's houses, isn't it? I see lots of people with books behind them. And that's pretty neat. So we're going to spend some time. Oh, actually, I wanted to get your thoughts from your small groups. If you would like to report about that, did some brainstorms come out of this? Did something really cool come out of this? What grabbed at your heart from your group or your time of personal reflection about Mary and Martha? I'm sorry, Wendy, for your sudden death of a daughter of friends. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing that now. God, we ask that you be with that family, Lord, who lost their daughter. Be with them and give them comfort in grief and their sorrow. And may the daughter who died rest in peace and rise in glory. Amen.
Amen.
Jeff has added some additional resources. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I will get that in the chat. And Vicky M says, we appreciate your efforts, Russ, and we certainly do appreciate your efforts. So any thoughts that come up? Maybe not. Maybe the findings you want to keep personally or personally to yourself, which is fine. I hope that Mary and Martha, they, even as I was talking, they really it struck me as how important they are in Jesus's whole story, and he clearly valued them, just like he did so many other women in the New Testaments. Loretta says, let's plan to be more extravagantly loving towards others. Yes, we determine to not either, or it's both and. Good point. Susan Roman says it was Junie, an important apostle, was in prison with Paul. She's the only female apostle named in the New Testament. Yes, I've often thought of doing a book on the women of Acts, and they are, that's an interesting thing to think about. Of course, I think Mary Magdalene was the greatest apostle of all, the apostle to the apostles. We will get into that. Women were truly disciples of Jesus. Yes, Each have our individual gifts, doing what we are where we can, doing something extravagant for Jesus, especially now during Lent, to go extra mile in the 3 disciplines of fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. You have also been so well educated. Importance of judgment, because we all have a little of both in ourselves, however, to good to stretch ourselves. Rosemary from Everett has her hand raised, Russ. Can you find Rosemary?
I can, yep.
Okay. Rosemary, what's your question?
Not a question, but a comment from our group. I was so impressed that Anne Murphy is working with 12 families, Afghan families,
Wow.
providing their needs, some of their needs from her own pocket. And that to me is extravagant
Extravagant.
service.
12
That's
families.
an extravagant Martha
That is
service.
kind of the best
Thank
of
you.
both worlds, the details of what they need and
Right.
also doing it.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you. Every extravagant gift I can give to Jesus actually must come from God. Good point. And when we see Jesus in the face of our sisters and brothers, and our ministry of hospitality reaches out to our neighbors, especially newly arrived refugees, we are blessing Jesus extravagantly. And I know he feels it. Absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to when I visited my father, 90-year-old father. I was fussing about his health, and he asked me to sit down and listen to his story. There we go. It's a moment of bringing together practical needs and listening to him. Good point, Mary and Martha, right there. All right, well, let's move on to Mary, Jesus's mother. And I know Roman Catholic Church, this is your field. There's a lot of adoration, a lot of history, a lot of respect, a lot of love for Mary, Jesus's mother, I think better than any other church. We visited a place in Wisconsin. We went to, I think it was Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and we went up and up a hill to a prayer chapel. It was beautiful, run by the Roman Catholic Church. And I know there's signs of that all over the country, all over the world. So I just want to say I thank you for that. I thank you for that adoration and that love and that mystification and raising Mary up. I grew up not thinking about her a lot, and it was only after I started to write about her that I fell in love, and I did. So Mary, Jesus's mother, in a nutshell, that's it right there. That's the nutshell. That's it. She was his mother. She gave birth to him, felt our Lord move in his womb. I think she's probably the only person in the world who's been kicked by Jesus. And like any other baby in the womb, he didn't care. He just wanted to stretch out. Okay, Ian, Rosemary Everett, we do not adore Mary. Okay, thank you for that. Like if he wanted to kick or dance at 3 a.m., he was going to do that. And she was the only person in history to feel pain, physical pain, of course, giving birth to him. Wasn't the only person in history to feel pain, but she's certainly probably the only person in history to feel pain, absolutely the only one of birthing Jesus. She was the only one to hold him to her breast and to give him the milk of life. He grew within her, came from her body, was sustained at her breast. She lost him at age 12 when he stayed in Jerusalem at the temple. She found him. And he was like a teenager then. He was kind of being a little, and I have a sense that he turned his ways right then a little bit after mother had expressed her anxiety to him. She brought on, I think, his first wedding at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, and stood nearby as he was murdered. She was there at the grave. She saw him shortly after the resurrection. Intimacy in so many ways. She was his mother from birth to death, and I am sure into eternity. She's noted in all 4 Gospels. Total word count, 191 words. Of course, that includes the Magnificat. When I was a 4th grader, we learned the words to the Magnificat. I was part of a junior choir, and we went and sang at the Episcopal Cathedral of St. Mark in downtown Minneapolis. I walked around for days singing the Magnificat, and I think my mother must have been very happy with that. I know I would have if my kids walked around singing the Magnificat. Who is she? We come to know her as a teenager, most likely 14 to 16, engaged to a carpenter named Joseph, Mary is a native of Nazareth in Galilee, the daughter of Anna and Joachim, a descendant of Leah, descendant of King David, and a member of the tribe of Judah. And Mary Ann says she remembers being touched by the detail that all of Jesus's human name came from Mary. That's one way of looking at it. I hadn't thought of that exactly, but I don't know what the other half would be if it wasn't Mary. And the Quran, yes, has an entire chapter dedicated to Mother Mary. They revere her, I'm told. Thank you, Pam, for straightening that out. We adore Christ, we honor and love Mary. She intercedes for us like we do for one another. I thought I'd heard the word adoration in terms of Christ, in terms of Jesus, in terms of Mary, but that makes it more clear. We adore Christ, we honor and have devotions to Mary, and it is her Magnificat is a magnificent prophetic statement. What do we know about Mary? That she is a clear and shining example of self-giving love. Love poured out of her. And what do these stories tell us about Jesus? That he was born of a human mother. He was fully human as well as fully divine, that he loved his mother dearly, that he could not have been on this earth without her direct and full involvement. Some scholars say that Mary died in Jerusalem. Others say Ephesus. She is cited in all 4 books, as I mentioned, and in the book of Acts. And Mary, thank you, Mary, Sister Mary Margaret. I think I'm seeing your group there in the room. Mary can say literally, this is my body, this is my blood. And yet we Catholics say that women cannot be ordained. Well, that's a really, Mary can say that literally. Thank you for that. New point. That really says a lot, doesn't it? And Catholics say women cannot be ordained. Yes, I know that. And I think of Mary Magdalene seeing the Lord at the end, and I think of don't get me started. I think of a lot of the other women in the Bible. I think of the bleeding woman, the first part of Matthew that was healed from Jesus, told her story, being an evangelist at the invitation of Jesus. She's being an evangelist, telling her story right on those dusty streets, holy ground, because Jesus is there. And then I feel bad that women are not allowed to preach in pulpits, whether it, the Baptist church, that's the one I was thinking of. But yeah. And this one, this is my body, this is my blood. Thank you, Mary Margaret. Thank you, sister. Quran states that Mary is the greatest woman who ever lived. Interesting. Mary's home near Ephesus has been a place of pilgrimage for Muslims ever since the beginning of the religion. Thank you. And this is where I learned things too. So I'd like to read what Mary may have thought during the beginning and the end of Jesus's life. There are other parts, of course, today, but we do have time constraints. Perhaps it was like this at the beginning, when she was about to give birth. It hurts so much. I need my mother. I need her to put my arms around me and tell me that everything will be all right. My mother has one phrase in times like this: it can't be that bad. But it is. It's worse than bad. It's awful. We're finally in Bethlehem. Herod has to count us. Bad timing. We've been on the road for 3 days now. As the sun rose, I started cramping up. First my back, then my stomach, like it was being crushed by a powerful iron band. I rode the donkey, I walked, and I cried. My water broke shortly before the sun went down, and then I got scared. Girls die from childbirth all the time. I'll find a place for us, Joseph says, and a midwife. I love that man more each minute. Groan, swell, sweat, pant, yell, groan, yell at Joseph, scream, yell at God. God, I cry, if this is your son I'm having, then do something, it hurts. Pain is overwhelming. We're in a cave for animals where they eat and sleep and poop, lit only by a single oil lamp. Crude wooden stalls, dirt floor. Did I mention the pooping part? A watering trough carved out of the stone wall. A few old sheep, our donkey and 2 others. I think I just saw a rat. The angel said I would bear God's son. Where's that angel now? Doesn't God's son deserve better than this, don't I? But I said yes, and I don't go back on my word. Finally, with one last horrible gut-wrenching push, the baby appears. Joseph and I have not even made love yet. This intimacy embarrasses me. Will he ever want me if this is what he has seen of me? He cuts the cord, wraps the baby in a clean tunic, and puts him to my breast. Ouch, that hurts. But the boy is beautiful. Olive-colored skin, brown eyes, thick lashes, long fingers also already twirling around mine. As if to shelter us from the world, Joseph puts his strong arms around us. I married the right man. He could have turned his back on me, but didn't. You're beautiful, he says. I love you more than you know, and I will fight to the death to protect you and our son. I think we forget, maybe you all don't, but I think we forget the realness of Mary, that she was a human being. And thank you, Jeff, Annunciation poem by Denise. Annunciation, thank you that. And Ellen says, I love this quote from Rachel Held Evans. God trusted God's very self totally and completely and in full bodily form to the care of a woman. God needed women for survival. Before Jesus fed us with the bread and wine, the body and blood, Jesus himself needed to be fed by a woman. He needed a woman to say, this is my body given for you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ellen, for that. Wow, that is, see, this is where it's good for me to have some in-house Bible study. I love that thought. So between his birth and his death, Mary says, please share this with, love to revisit in December with young mothers in my life. It's in my book. Oh, it's in an upcoming book. I'm sorry. One that I'm working on now. Between his birth and death, we see Mary at Cana of Galilee, encouraging to do his first miracle. And like, she's like, you can do it. And he says, no, I can't. I'm not ready for it yet. And she says, they need wine. And I love the part where she walks away, says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. She leaves the decision for Jesus to do his first miracle in his hands. She pushes him. Good mothers do that. But it's up to him whether or not to do his first miracle. And his first miracle is at the behest of his mother. And the wine that he makes there at Cana in Galilee is literally the best wine that anybody has ever tasted. How cool is that? I mean, you do wonder if Mary saw some miracles of Jesus was growing up. I'm sure she did. And she knew he was ready before he knew that he was ready. We see her on the road at his side. We see her trying to patch up the relationship between Jesus and his brothers. His family thought he was a little crazy. His brothers especially were angry with him. He's the oldest born. He should be having a family, taking care of his mother. He's not. He's off. Doesn't seem to have a stable relationship with women. He's off, comes, goes, makes his mother sad. She brings them on the road to see Jesus, to try to patch up the family disharmony. He's busy in a house. They're outside. They can't even get into the house to see where Jesus is performing miracles. So Mary sends a runner in to say that your mother and your brothers are here. Come out and see us. She's trying to patch up family dynamics. She finally gets the other boys out on the road to see Jesus. And he says, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Imagine how that must have hurt her. I think, who is my mother and who's my brothers? So, and we see her at the cross. You know, we don't call that crucifixion very often a murder, and it was a murder. Nothing short of that, but somehow we don't use the word with us. Perhaps the very end of his life, it went like this. This is how I see her at the end, how I think she might have thought. Because mothers always take the blame for their children, don't they? Not the credit, but the blame when things are up in the air. The end stares me in the face. They have hung Jesus on a cross to die. There is no hope that he will see another dawn. I am with the other women, my sisters in faith. They love him, there is no doubt, but not one has had him in her womb. Not one has breastfed him or toilet trained him. They didn't have toilets back there. You know what I mean. They have not told him it was time to do his first miracle. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. If I'd been a different kind of mother, he might not have been here today. Joseph and I had stayed in Egypt, Jesus might have had a family by now. Gabriel failed to tell me this part, that my son would be caught and tortured and die in front of my eyes. If I had asked more questions of that angel, bargained differently, not supported Jesus every step of the way, maybe he'd still be looking at a full life, a whole life. Maybe he would have children by now and I would be holding them in my lap. If. My head spins, my heart races, my knees shake. The horizon weaves in and out. I need to throw up. I'm afraid to watch him die, afraid of life without him. Afraid. My insides scream at God. Is this what you had in mind for your son, our son? You didn't tell me that, or I would not have agreed. You created the earth, and now you can't save our son? Soldiers pierce Jesus' side. They give him vinegar instead of water. How much more can he take? How much more can I take? Get this man some water. He looks my way. He needs me, like he always has, from that first moment of conception through this. I am right here for you, son. I am so right here. Jesus tilts his head toward John, the only disciple brave enough to show up here, then looks at me. John moves next to me, puts his arm around me. This is your son, Jesus says to me, and this is your mother, he says to John. Jesus is caring for me, providing for me, loving me, even in death, but the sky is as dark as I've ever seen it. My sweet boy is gone. As he breathed his last, the sky shook, the ground is rumbling, and worshipers in the temple are running toward us. The curtain has been torn in two, they say. The curtain is torn in two. That place. We saw the Holy of Holies, they say. That place where only a high priest is allowed in, and then only once a year. My son was never invited. And now I bend over him, kiss him. I am wrenched into pieces, but relieved that he is no longer suffering. On the third day, might have gone like this. God bless Mary Magdalene. She was out of the tomb first thing this morning. And she says she saw Jesus, dirty, scarred, looking like a gardener, but alive. Of course she ran to hug him, arms wide open. Don't hug me, Mary. Don't cling to me. I have work to do. Of course he has work to do. He always has work to do. But my son is breathing again, not doomed to Satan's claws. God saved him, rescued him, brought him back to life. I'm tired and exhausted. But this is what children do. They exhaust us. This one in particular. Yet I'm also filled with joy, more joy than I have ever known. I can't wait to see him, to hold him. And I will hold him with all my heart, for I will always be his mother. Oof. You know, some people see Mary as a frightened teenage girl. Others see her as someone to kneel before, someone who has been cited over the centuries, giving hope, doing miracles. Others find her too unapproachable, just too good, too submissive, too virginal. I was one of those skeptics for years. I just couldn't feel a lot of depth for her. Not sure why, because she seemed really perfect in blue, her face placid throughout the years. Even after I became a mother, the deep connection wasn't there. I liked her story. I liked thinking of her. I liked hearing about her and the shepherds and hearing Ave Maria on Christmas Eve. But that lukewarm feeling continued too long. As I mentioned, that has changed since I started writing about her. And I see how much she treasured her family. I see her faith in God. I see her facing her miraculous and sometimes frustrating boy. She worked at keeping her family together. She did not walk away from Jesus when he pushed her away and his brothers away. She camped out to be close to him. She pushed him when necessary. She stayed beside him as he took his last breath and helped put him into the grave. You know, most of all, I realized that she said yes. And that's, I'll get to her pondering things in a minute, but she said yes. And the minute we say yes to love, you know, we're also most likely saying yes to grief, yes to all kinds of things. But Mary said yes. And through Jesus's life, she pondered things. She did that at his birth. She did that at the temple. And that is what intelligent people do. That is what faithful people do. Like Mary of Bethany, like Thomas, like the Samaritan woman. They ponder things in her heart. She was a deep thinker. I value most the words from the Orthodox Jewish Bible. Miriam was treasuring up all these things, pondering them in her Lev, L-E-V. For the Israelites, Lev meant heart, not an organ, but that part of oneself where emotions are felt, choices are made, and where we ponder the deepest parts of life. In her Lev, I imagine these thoughts making themselves known to her, pondering things over the years. Why is God choosing me to do this? God is the father of this child, not Joseph. What's with the star, that beautiful star? Who are these wise men and why are they here? What do they know that I don't? How does my son know so much? Why does he turn me and his brothers away? Why does Jesus not want grandchildren? I'd like grandchildren from him. If my son wants peace in the world, why not try it at home first? And oh my God, I'm talking to you, God, the creator of this child. Why must he die in his prime? He has so much more to give. People are finally just seeing him and seeing you. And now he's dying. How can I get through this heartbreak of watching my beloved boy die? Or it was heartbreak. What do you think? And if you just jump in here, I mean, Mary is revered over the ages in the Catholic Church. What might we learn from Mary? What do you learn from Mary? What do you treasure about Mary? Queen of Heaven, Mary's battle for souls. This is a really good one. To looser the devil, she is an implacable foe. Queen of Heaven is an encounter with Mary as you've never had before. I can't wait to read that. Thank you. What has Mary done for you, even as a little child in your soul? Her fidelity to her yes. Is she deeply in your heart? And if so, why? Feel free to raise your hand or jump in the chat. Yes, I see a hand there. Shannon has her hand up. Russ?
Mary kind of like embodies the statement I heard that faith is to believe in spite of the evidence and then watch the evidence change.
Could you repeat that, please?
To believe in spite of the evidence and watch the evidence change.
Wow, very nice. Thank you. Thank you. We hear a lot outside the Roman Catholic Church. We hear a lot about miracles, children seeing Mary. Does that ring true for you? You believe it? That she's with us to this day, guiding us and helping us and showing up occasionally? I believe it. Russ, all the mothers and figures who have suffered the unique and unspeakable grief of seeing their children die before them. Yes. Today I'm thinking of next Benedict's grandmother. Torture. We just all had those 3 policemen killed here in Minneapolis, outside of Minneapolis in Burnsville. So we're all grieving for them. And Rita says the only named disciple of the cross in John's Gospel of Women. I do believe John, the beloved disciple. Well, we don't know the name of the beloved disciple except for John wrote it. It's in John's name. So you're right. The beloved disciple could have been something else, but didn't we have John running to the grave? Or I'm not sure if that was with Peter racing to the grave. He steps back and lets Peter get in first. There's a little competition between them, I think. Sheila says, I believe she stays near us. Nintendo says, I treasure Mary as a teenager to bring a girl positive message A teen pregnant outside marriage. Good point. A married woman living with an extended family, a widow adopted by another family. These are African realities. These are contemporary realities. Thank you for that, Nintendo. Absolutely, she couldn't be other than with a follower of her son. Jeff says the beloved disciple is not John. Say something. We don't know. We don't know, do we? But I think you gotta pick a path and go down it. So Anne says Mary's strength or courage, a true countercultural woman, a role model, and a determination. I think the Catholic Church has envisioned her as a lily white, pure woman, which seldom resonated. Me neither. Maureen says, beloved disciple is Lazarus. Lots of thought on that. Mary chooses to appear on children of poor people, teaches us we need to focus on. She is what brought me to this church, an image of a mother and child. Thank you, Linda. We're taught that Mary is our great intercessor. Yes. All right. And I'll tell you what, I see Mary as one of the teachers of Jesus. Where might he have heard the Beatitudes? Good point. Where may have seen nonviolence modeled so they could practice it consistently. Thank you, Mary Margaret. Thank you, sister. Here's some thoughts that I've added, the things that we might learn from Mary. That Jesus, like all human beings, needed his mother. That pondering things in one's heart is often the right thing to do before taking action. To stand beside our children and love them no matter the risk to others. Those who don't have biological children, I know you are finding children to stand next to. Teach them, help them. Necessary to see things through to the end. And to trust that we will be with our loved ones again because Jesus broke through the bonds of death. On Tando, she was supported by women disciples of Jesus. Power of sister power. Yes, absolutely. I have some questions written down here. We're not going to do a small group now, but the questions that I have for you to think about are the yes that Mary gave to God was a full-bore, life-changing, history-changing asset. Assertion. What would have happened if she had said no? What would have happened if she'd said no? Jesus wouldn't be the same. Would we have Jesus? God wouldn't have gone down the street looking for somebody else. And free will indicates that Mary did have a choice. Why do you think God did not choose Joseph to biologically father Jesus? Obviously, God's divinity wouldn't have been there. And how do you feel about Mary and why? High points and low points, if any. I feel blessed. I feel blessed by Mary as I've come to know her through the years. I have turned to her when I've been very sad or in grief. I think she is present, and I'm grateful to her. Mary is the first disciple of Jesus, being stretched by Jesus to continue growing in faith and trusting of God. Yes, the first disciple. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. As he hung on the cross, did Mary recall Gabriel's words? He will inherit the throne of David, his father. His kingdom will last forever. I'd like to think she did. I like to think she did recall those words. Thank you. She reminds us that ordinary choices in private lives are history making. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, let's turn to Mary of Magdalene. We have about an hour left. Here's how I see that going. We'll spend time on Mary Magdalene. I think she's my favorite woman in the New Testament. Have some small group time, and then we come back together, gather, discussion, final questions, conclusion shared by group, and a closing prayer. So that's what we'll do for this last hour. It's very quiet downstairs. I'm not hearing the dog at all, and I'm guessing that he's probably getting all rested. So when I get up, he'll be ready to play. That's my guess. Mary Magdalene's. Could we take a 10-minute break? Do other people want to take a 10-minute break? I think E.N. Rosemary Everett. I'm not sure what the E.N. is for. I think we had an opportunity to take a break in the last small group. So I guess we're going to go ahead, but we will have an opportunity to take a break after we talk about Mary Magdalene, if that's okay with you, Rosemary. Mary Magdalene, I have seen the Lord. Famous words. In a nutshell, Mary of Magdala, Jesus's friends, and the leader of the women around Jesus. That's who she was. Healed from 7 demons, she gives her life over to Jesus, is at the cross, and according to John, the first to see Jesus in his resurrected body. And the strange thing about Mary Magdalene, I think you'll be surprised by this, is we never hear from her until after the resurrection. She is, I'm saying by recorded voice, which says to me that maybe she wasn't as seen as that impressive. Maybe she wasn't seen as that important, just another one of the women until she speaks about the resurrection. She's referred to 14 times in the New Testament, but there are no words from her until we hear her famous words, I have seen the Lord. And then there are 61 in total. You can read her story in all 4 Gospels, Matthew 27, 28, Mark 15, 16, Luke 8, 24, John 19, and 20. And her classic moment is, of course, when she encountered the risen Christ after discovering the empty tomb. Jürgen Moltmann says that we would not have any witnesses, to the resurrection if it weren't for her. In the other Gospels, we have other women at the tomb, but I'm working at John's Gospel today because it is the most profound Gospel when it comes to the resurrection. Jürgen tells us that we would not have any, that women preachers gave us the story of the resurrection, and that's absolutely true. It didn't come, there were no men there by themselves initially. They were the ones who preached that story, possibly the most important story of all. Here's Jürgen's exact words: without women preachers, we would have no knowledge of the resurrection. Without women preachers, we would have no knowledge of the resurrection. Kind of says it all. He just says Mary Magdalene's first words are in John 20. Thank you. And she did write a gospel, a non-canonical gospel, but the end of that non-canonical gospel ends with, it's almost demonic. It's something to the effect of, I can't remember it. I'm sorry. I used to carry it around with me. Let me just move beyond that, but it's not a good ending on that. Who was Mary Magdalene? A woman from Magdala, thus her name, in Galilee. And I noticed, Russ, on the website, she's always referred to as Mary of Magdala rather than Mary Magdalene. So that's an important distinction. Tell us more about her, I guess, where she was from. She's a follower of Jesus. She's a woman inhabited by 7 demons that were cast out by Jesus. She's a witness to both the crucifixion and the resurrection. She's the first person to whom Jesus appeared after he rose from the dead, and the first person to proclaim Jesus's resurrection as in Matthew and John. She was also named in Luke and John as doing so, but she is joined by the other women. Contrary to popular thought, there is no evidence in the gospel that she was a prostitute. In 1969, your Pope announced that she was not the sinful woman that anointed Jesus. And that's pretty late, though, 1969, to say that. So it's all over in books. And she was either married to Jesus, she was a prostitute before she met Jesus. It's all out there. But, you know, that's the way it is with women in the Bible who are doing important things. The word also means tower. Thank you, Maureen. And it's just women in the Bible. Rahab is my favorite woman in the whole Bible. She was a prostitute back in the book, back in the day. She was a prostitute in this city of Jericho. but she's referred to 5 times as a prostitute throughout her life in the New Testament. And, I'm not sure her vocation deserved to be mentioned 5 times. So at any rate, some of our most important women in the Bible took unsavory occupations, and that's the way it is. But Mary Magdalene, there's no evidence whatsoever. What did she say? John 20:20, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb and we do not know where they laid him. And that's one of the big ones that we're looking at today too. And we think, think about her at that tomb. The angels are saying first to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Okay, the angels are saying that. And she says, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Then Jesus comes along. She doesn't know who he is. But he says, "Woman, why you are weeping? Why are you weeping?" That must have been a little frustrating at that point. You got the angel sent from God who can't seem to figure out why Mary is weeping. Mary Magdalene is weeping. But then you have Jesus coming along and saying, why are you weeping? And I would point out that these words come from the Old Testament, from Samuel. Remember, Hannah couldn't have any babies, and she was married to a woman who was also married to her husband, and she prayed. She couldn't have babies, and she couldn't have babies. And she eventually did. She's Samuel's mother. But her husband, Elkanah, comes to her and says, "Why are you weeping?" So I think that the link between Hannah and Elkanah, her husband, said, "Why are you weeping?" She's infertile. She can't have babies. She wants to. And then this link here, you've got just this incredibly tender moment when Jesus says, "Why are you weeping?" He knows that he's Jesus when he shows up as the resurrected Christ, but she doesn't recognize him because remember, she doesn't excuse me, she thought him to be the gardener. Well, why would she think him to be the gardener? And this is really important. Nadia Bolz-Weber pointed this one out. Because he's all dirty, because he's scarred, because he's got dirt all over him. He's messy. And she says, Nadia Bolz-Weber says that the reason he was looking that way is that resurrection is a messy business. And I love that because that's, you kind of skip over it, supposing him to be the gardener, because maybe there was a gardener there. And of course there was, I guess, but he's all dirty and he's all scarred and he's all dirty. She says the resurrection is a messy business. I just love that. We don't know where he's been in the last couple of days. There are often things, people say that he was fighting demons, say that he was in hell. We don't know for sure what happened in those 2 days, but it's messy. It's messy for Jesus getting resurrected, and it's also messy for us when we're pulled back to life from some awful crisis. We're changed. Somebody dies, somebody we love is very sick, you get all in your own world and you don't know who you are anymore. But when you come out of that, you're messy, you're not the same person. And that's clearly happening to Jesus. Jeff says only Mary was there to hear the conversation. That's right. Mary Magdalene told the whole story. I think that's why people knew it. Thank you, Rita. And if I wasn't clear on that historical piece in 1969, you said it very well. So let me go on. Jesus says to her, "Why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." She would have too. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." She told them that he had told her these things. "I have seen the Lord." That's an amazing thing to say, especially if you were overtaken by 7 demons earlier in your life. And those demons could have been anything from epilepsy to paralysis, to depression, to any number of forms of mental illness as well as physical illness. Jesus healed her. And then she actually sees the Lord. And there are comments there for you all to read. But I just want to say, to be able to say that, if you could just imagine what she must have been feeling at that point. I have likely characteristics of hers down as lion-hearted, loyal, intrepid, loving, resilient, faithful, tenacious. Lion-hearted, loyal, intrepid, loving, resilient, faithful, and tenacious. Mary Magdalene's story is one of unabashed love for the one who healed her, Jesus. And surprisingly, because she's such a key woman in the New Testament, as I mentioned, her only recorded words come after Jesus' death. Apparently people took notice of her. All of a sudden she had this story to tell that would shatter current history, would last for thousands of years, and would bring into reality all the words of the Old Testament. What do we know about her from Scripture? This is a question not asked enough over the last 2,000 years. Excuse me, as most of what we hear about her, that she was a prostitute, has no scriptural basis. And I see some of you commenting on that. It's great. Here's what the Bible says about Mary Magdalene. She was healed by demons in Mark 16 and Luke 8. She traveled on the road with Jesus's disciples at least some of the time. Mark 15, Luke 8. She was a leader among women. When they list a list of people that women traveled with Jesus, she's always at the front of it. She stood at the front of the cross, Mark 15, Matthew 27, Mark 15, John 25. She was the first to see and talk with Jesus after the resurrection, Matthew 28, John 20, and she proclaimed him as the Christ. We can appreciate her remarkable transformation and devotion, absolutely, and courageous. Thank you, Lucy. So what about these demons? As I mentioned, I don't contradict Jesus. I mentioned that those demons may be other things in contemporary language, but if Jesus healed people from demons, then there were demons. As I mentioned today, we might define such afflictions as panic attacks, schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, epilepsy, substance abuse, etc. Clearly, some substance abuse is a demon, is demonic activity. Whatever the illness, whatever the deficiency, whatever the cause, Jesus healed those whose lives were shattered and torn apart by outside or inner forces, overpowering the forces that kept people from living whole and integrated lives. I think of the important step in AA when you turn things over to a higher power. Healing is found there as well due to the higher power. So Mary Magdalene was one of the broken people. Suffering from 7 maladies, her distress would have been overpowering, her isolation unbearable. It did not matter if the bars that surrounded her were invisible, for she had her indeed known solitary confinement in the midst of all those demons. You know, people say she wasn't a prostitute. There's no evidence of it in the Bible. Maybe at some point she did turn to prostitution. I don't know. Because she had no money. She was scared. No doubt she was homeless. No doubt she was untouchable. Maybe it was all she can do, but there is no basis for that in Scripture. True or not, and I don't think it's probably not true, but not sure. Neither does the Bible mention the possibility that she might have been married, because she does have the finances to help support Jesus in Luke 3, verse 3.
Sweetie up, come on. Sweetie.
There's a doggy in the picture. I see him. What mattered was that upon meeting Jesus, her long sentence of turmoil-filled heartbreak began to unravel. She could finally let go of all those things and let go of her reaction to them. With a word and a touch, Jesus healed her. Back in the day, in the Bible, they talk about demons running out of people's bodies. Remember the story of of the demons going into the pigs and then the pigs being drowned. What would have happened right there in that moment when Jesus healing Mary Magdalene? We'll never know. But the point is that he healed her completely. For the first time in many years, she was a free, fully integrated person with a new group of people to love and a reason to live, Jesus. No wonder she was so loyal to him. If you can picture them all, picture the group of disciples, men and women that traveled with Jesus. I think it must have been wonderfully freeing for her to have a purpose, to have relationships, to have Jesus in the midst of that. It's a pretty powerful story. Daniel says that Mary was at the tomb because Jesus had given her new life. She was truly loved by God and she was faithful to the end, so faithful. She is the one who would not give up and went to the tomb. And their experience that Jesus was not dead, but risen. Rita adds, when she says, if you took him, tell me and I will take him, that's when Jesus decides, this is the witness, good point, who I can trust to carry my message of resurrection and invitation. Right there, that's interesting that of course Jesus would have heard those words. I do believe he was present even though he's physically dead. That's when if you took him, tell me and I will take him. And isn't that what we all want to hear at the end of our lives, that somebody we love will be near us? Somebody will take care of us, our bodies left behind. And Jesus is seeing this happening, no doubt. If you took him, tell me and I will take him. And she would have, I don't know if she was a small woman or a big woman, but she would have dragged that body out of there and found a safe place for it. 2 miles is probably too far to go back to Martha and Bethany's house, but you never know. Excuse me. She traveled with the group of disciples at Jesus's request, along with other women who were healed and were provided needed funds. Co-ed travel was no doubt pretty much taboo in those days, but Jesus made room for all. She was a leader among women. When she is named with the other women in the Gospels, as I mentioned, her name is consistently at the top of the list. One senses that because of her life experiences, she was able to guide the other women through the tensions of living away from their families, camping outdoors. I think she was pretty tough. She may have also acted as a bridge to the men in the group, who most likely found it frustrating that women were taking on key roles. Such bridge work was evident when from the empty tomb she ran to Peter's house first. She stood at the foot of the cross. She will see her friend through till the end. She may be scared, of course she's scared. She may be worried, of course she's worried. She may be filled with anticipatory grief and more, but she will be there. She will risk it all. She will be there, much as Mary, Jesus's mother, was there. Mary Magdalene is there as well. She was the first to see and talk with Jesus after the resurrection. There were many reasons why Mary Magdalene might not have gone to the tomb and that morning, but one overreaching reason why she did. She loved Jesus. She would make sure that he was properly cared for, even in death. Imagine her surprise and delight when upon recognizing him. Imagine her wanting to throw her arms around him, which she did. Jesus says, don't cling to me. She had to have her arms wide open. Imagine her heart soaring when he called her by name. Mary had disappointed in her life. Many had disappointed her in life. Jesus had not. She could trust Jesus. And she was the first to proclaim that he was risen, that he had overcome death and the grave. With the simple words, I have seen the Lord, history is rocked forever. Siddiqa adds here, from that hour, the disciple took her into the house. I can't quite read the small print and stay on top here. So the chosen is big. Thank you for that. Consider this. Jesus chose a once broken woman to carry the most important news of all time back to the world, that the powers of darkness had been beaten back. Mary Magdalene had seen the risen Jesus, the one who would overcome death and the grave, the one who would make eternal life possible for all who believe. And this is where commentary fails, this point. Perhaps the words of Mary, Jesus' mother, are best invoked. Let it be to me according to your word. Like Mary, Mary Magdalene gave her heart and soul to Jesus and suffered greatly because of it. As Jesus took care of his mother from the cross by appointing her a new son, Jesus also reached out to Mary Magdalene, assuring her that he had overcome death and the grave and would always be accessible to her and to others who would believe. I have some thoughts on what we might learn from Mary Magdalene. I'd like to take a minute and find out what your thoughts are or your questions are. Why does she make a difference to you? Or what, do you have any questions? Mary Magdalene is a privileged witness in the sense she is the only prominent apostle disciple who experienced his healing power in her own person. Thank you, Rita. The Catholic Church stands on the words of Mary Magdalene, and so do we in the Episcopal Church and other denominations. But you're right, she was the only prominent apostle, a disciple who experienced this healing power in her own person. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of women of the Bible. I think about that a lot. And I'm thinking we're seeing many more instances of their relationship with Jesus coming because they're asking for healing. We see men being given a mission, given a job by Jesus, or given the mission, building a church. Go build my church, Peter. You be the rock of the church. That's a mission. But in the Bible, we tend to see women like coming to him for healing or being touched by him because of healing. It's a much different response. Wounded healer becomes healer, anoints his body. Okay, thank you, Val. I wonder if she and Mary Nazareth spent time together under the foot of the cross. The friendship of these two special women would make a great story. Yes, it would, and they did. They did on the road. They were both on the road with Jesus. Russ says, I love that she shows up specifically and is named at the hard times instead of just throughout Jesus's ministry. I feel like we're all called to show up at the hard times, especially for Christ crucified today, and we can lean on Mary as our model and inspiration. Thank you, Russ. Shannon, the Catholic Church stands on Mary of Magdala on Easter and then forgets her until her feast day in July. She was the bringer and preacher of the good news, but will not allow us to proclaim the good news now. Thank you, Shannon. I was ordained on the feast of Mary and Martha. In the Catholic lectionary, the account of Mary Magdalene as first witness is relegated to a weekday rather than a Sunday literature. Is it the same in the Episcopal Church? I read that story on your website about half of the reading getting left out on Easter Sunday. No, we read it all on Easter Day. We read the whole story on Easter Day. So it's not relegated to a weekday, and we hear the whole story. Thank you for still a book study on Richie's book. Jonine, she helps me trust that wherever I've done doesn't keep me from the love and mercy of Jesus. Val says, roadie disciple. Thank you for that point, especially Jonine. Whatever we've done doesn't keep us from the love and mercy of Jesus. Excellent point. Excellent point. Teaches us that anyone can follow Jesus and be forgiven. Yes. Is there a Catholic church in Washington who reads the whole story on Easter with Mary? There is a Catholic church in Washington who reads the whole story on Easter with Mary. I was surprised when I looked at that article on your website that wasn't the case. Actually, it's such a great story. I mean, everything depends on it. And I am happy to say that we probably read it at a different time of year as well, probably on her feast day. What also might we learn from Mary Magdalene? Jesus calls surprising people into relationship with him. She gave all she had while others held back. You know, the young man, the rich young man, when Jesus said he wasn't sure to join the group because he had to go back and bury his father, I think. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. And Mary Magdalene did that. Samaritan woman leaves jar. Mary Magdalene leaves spices behind. Thank you. So she gave all she had while others held back. True healing gathers and integrates the whole self. Real ministry comes from deep love, not obligation. And communicating God's presence with others and is an essential part of Mary Magdalene's gift to us. So, I just want to hold Mary Magdalene out there for a minute. And just the immense, who she was, what she did, what she saw, what she gave, how she was healed, transformed into a whole person because of Jesus. She's my favorite woman in the New Testament, and I think that she may be some of yours as well. Her leadership was suppressed, and Peter's leadership became stronger, says Sister Mary Margaret. That was the beginning of patriarchy in the church, yes. I wonder what our church might look like if Mary Magdalene's feminine presence and leadership had remained prominent. I wonder. And yes, female leadership was more rewarded in the New Testament. I'm thinking of Dorcas, my mother-in-law. Somebody is from Marblehead, I think they said early on, and my mother-in-law and my husband were from Lawrence, Massachusetts. My mother-in-law belonged to a circle at her church, and it was called the Dorcas Circle. The Dorcas Circle. I have to say it just right. She had that Massachusetts, New Hampshire accent. The Dorcas Circle. And they made things for the poor. They sewed things. And so, I mean, and she, in the early churches, in Acts, she ran things out of her house. There are several instances of Acts of women having house churches where they would get together, they would sew, they would knit, and they would discuss the gospel, discuss just what their predecessors had seen. And so, yes, there is that suppression of women in the church as it goes on in terms of the patriarchal system. I know you all are watching. Some of you are watching The Chosen. It has been recommended to me that I watch it. I'm sure I would enjoy it, but I haven't watched it yet. So, Mary Magdalene, I'd like to take some small group time here or personal time for reflection. You can have a break or hopefully go to this small group. I've got 3 questions here, and I know Russ has one that he will put in the chat. And thank you, June Ruth. Oh, yes, I was at Adeline Wood Conference Center. Thank you. Thank you for that. Bless all the women in the Bible. But I'm just going to read the questions that I have in one of my books about Mary Magdalene, and then I will leave the main question for you to ask. Here's a thought. Even though Mary Magdalene was quite wounded before Jesus healed her, she must have had qualities that were clearly important to him, for she was one of his closest friends. What might they have been? Mary Magdalene, number 2, Mary Magdalene had known spiritual warfare in her soul. To what extent could that have made her more aware of Jesus's power and more loyal to him for healing her? How does brokenness contribute to discipleship? We don't see the men so much as broken, do we, in the Bible? We see Nathaniel under the fig tree, things like that. We see people fishing. But the wounded women are the ones who are coming to Jesus. And it's a whole different story. How brokenness contributes to discipleship. What must Mary Magdalene have felt when she realized that Jesus had risen from the grave? How would you feel if someone you loved had died, gone through all that grief, and then all of a sudden they're physically there in the presence? I think that's what we forget about. We get the story, we heard them 100 times, we get the stories, but if you just think about it, the person you loved and you've been grieving so hard is standing before you. That must have just been amazing for her. Thank you, Joan. So I'd like to take small groups or personal times now until 2:45, and I'll recover my voice a little bit. I'm getting a little hoarse here. And so please come back at 2:45 and we will finish up. And I thank you for all your witness and your knowledge. You've clearly got a lot of knowledge in your group. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lindsay.
I'll see you
So
back at 2:45.
245, yeah. So the question that Lindsay poses for us in our small groups is, tombs are places of darkness and grief. What would have happened if Mary Magdalene had not been there? What does it mean for Jesus and for us that she showed up?
So thoughts from your small group or personal time of reflection that stood out that you'd like to share?
Go ahead, Rita. I saw you physically raised your hand.
So first, I was very blessed to be with Beth and Marie. And I think safe to say, we concluded that the darkness of the tomb persists today because the Roman Catholic Church refuses to allow all of John 21 to 18 be read on a Sunday, and even more importantly, investigated and preached on. And so they refused to let us see that Peter was there, he left, and who did Jesus choose? And so it's a form of darkness. And anyhow, so we agreed on that and had a nice, robust discussion.
Very eloquent of you, Rita. I'm sorry that is the case. It just seems such a blatant piece of scripture to leave out.
And I'll
Lucy?
warn everyone that if your priest or pastor or whoever tries to read the shortened version on Palm Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other women are also left out in year B. It ends just as the Roman guard says something like, surely this was the Son of God. And then the next line is, there are all these women who were there, including Mary Magdalene, etc. And if the priest tries to read the optional version, which is the shortened version, that next line is what disappears. So I saw Lucy, you had your hand up.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I really like this thought from Loretta in our small group. She said her thought was, to whom much is given, much is expected. That Mary Magdalene was healed by Jesus, and she returned that with her faithfulness, that she was able to return that. And I keep thinking about that right now, like how many times Jesus, especially since we're reading Mark, everything's about secrecy. Jesus keeps telling, don't tell anybody, that you were healed. It's all about secrecy. Yet Mary Magdalene was able to go beyond that and tell us today in this year, 2024, that Jesus was risen. So I love that thought.
I was privileged to be with two gifted women who, since they can't preach in the Catholic Church, go to their Lutheran brothers and sisters and use their gifts in another church.
Mm.
There's a hand up. Russ, see that hand? Gloria.
Is it Gloria? Yeah, go ahead, Gloria. Oh, here, let me send you a message to unmute.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Russ, when you mentioned the Passion on Palm Sunday, I just wanted to say, for several years, and I'm now in a new parish, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. I worked with a group of about 6 people, and we tell the Passion by heart. We spend a couple of months preparing, so everybody has their part, and we get the full story. Just wanted to mention that. But it is just so powerful to see the gospel told by the people who are sitting in the pews, and told well. I mean, because we do spend time rehearsing and deciding who gets to give the microphone to whom, and so on and so forth. So it just feels like a one entire powerful story. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gloria.
Daniel has his hand up. You see him, Russ?
Yeah, let me try sending you another message here, Daniel, to unmute. Hmm. You sh okay. Daniel,
He's
if
talking
you,
like crazy.
yeah, Daniel, if you just hold off for a minute, I'm going to send a little alert to your window. Give it a second to pop up, and it should say the host has asked you to unmute. There we go.
Okay, good. I think one of the difficulties that many of us, in particular women, have in our church is the fact that we have moved so slowly. But my concern also, and I think is Pope Francis' concern, he doesn't want schism to happen in the church, so we continue to move very slowly, even though we see things going forward. I'm wondering what observations you have, given the fact of what the experience of the Episcopal and Anglican Church has been. And how do we try to move forward and keep us together and not lose hope?
Well, that's a really thoughtful question. And, I don't know if we've got so much the problem of schism. Of course, actually we do with our African brothers and sisters. It's tough. I see our Archbishop really, same thing as you, really walking, Archbishop of Canterbury is walking very tentatively, like he's on an ice shelf that's about to crack. And you can see the crack, and he's got one foot on either side. And it is really hard. And I respect him for sometimes he doesn't call the bishops into session. And most of this is over the difference in understanding of gay clergy, because Africa is so opposed to that, and they're growing in numbers much more than we are on the continent, and they can't stand to be the bishops of Africa, and the United States can't stand to be in each other's presence sometimes, because if the bishops in Africa say, well, people are killing people over this issue, and women ordained priests, it's like crazy. How would you even think of that in our country, back out in the rural areas, especially? I don't think we'll split, but the other problem is that we have the problem of erosion, just like other denominations, people just not liking something and walking away. That's what I respect about your group, because you're here and you're in the church and you're staying in the church. And so it's all I can say is that it's painful for us too. And I hope things don't get torn apart. Our next Archbishop may always been of Canterbury. It may well be from Nairobi next time, which is fine. But the Episcopal Church finds itself more and more out on a limb, separated from other parts of the communion, because of our strong beliefs that yes, women should be ordained, and gay men and women should be ordained, and in full, full service to the church. And it makes arguments about our 1972 prayer book, which was the last time we printed a prayer book, seem rather small. So I don't have any great advice, but we're going through the same thing. So
Thank you.
anybody else has good advice, we certainly glad to hear it. Val has her hand up.
One, I would suggest maybe the Episcopal Church go through the synodality process that the Catholic Church is going through right now for discussion, because it's brought together all the continents in the Catholic Church, and to listen to each other and to listen prayerfully. And the bishops and priests and people who attended have come back and said, we learned so much by listening to our brothers and sisters from other places of things we didn't understand before or didn't know before.
Yeah.
We may not agree, but we're listening.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I've always said about the Catholic Church since day one sexuality is the basis for all the decisions that seem to be made about the big questions.
Mm. Mm.
It seems to always go back to that.
Good point. And apparently, even in the early days of the church, the early writers of yeah, good point. Was that Val that just spoke? See, she has her hand up.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was, yeah.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Yes, I see a hand up.
Go ahead, Gail. Gail, I just sent you a message to unmute yourself. There you go.
In our small group, one of the participants said that Jesus would invite all the disciples to come and see, and back to Mary Magdalene, that she was the one who could see, who did see. And just I love being reminded of her brokenness today, because I think through her brokenness, she was able to see that she had transcendent experiences that maybe enabled, prepared her to see Jesus, to recognize him and be open to that transcendent experience, and not and have the courage to run. And as this woman pointed out, during the political scene there, that was risky, to declare that she was even a disciple of Jesus, that she could.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, it was a great point, and that took a lot of courage to do that, but she did. But then back to the church, I think contemplation, like contemplative practices, I don't know, maybe like whatever you do, kind of opens your mind beyond all these trivial things. Well, they're not trivial, but where you see everyone as equals, it transcends the rational, where all these arguments are happening, and it opens one to a mystical experience. Like Jesus was like also inviting these guys to come and see, it was like he was, come along the mystical journey with me. Like that's what he was saying. You're going to see big things. And like their minds must have been blown. All these things, resurrections of the dead and everything. Well, maybe the church can resurrect too, and resurrect from these petty things which are not petty, but on a bigger level, you see through it, because you see humans as beings, as beyond the rational. You're opening the third eye of seeing or knowing, and you experience love in that transcendent agape way, where how could you say that a gay priest can't be a priest, or a woman can't be a priest? Because you're seeing the humanity and the soul being, that we're all one. You see the fact that we are all one, so that's where I think. And there's, in my church, they wanted to run centering prayer groups during Lent. No one signed up, and I signed up, but nobody else wanted to. And that you can enter into contemplatio with it, with the scripture, and have those openings, So I don't know. And I also draw upon Buddhist teachings too. I mean, it just helps me navigate my Christian experience deeply. So that's my cure for the church.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. That's pretty good cure. And there's Mary of Bethany right there, understanding exactly what you're saying. We need to wrap this up. And I'm glad June Ruth, I'm glad you were in Exeter Cathedral, and the first woman priest is over there. That's wonderful. I'm going to close with a prayer from Teresa of Avila, again, one of your saints that you lifted up and that we all treasure, 1515 to 1583. Lines from the Breviary. Let nothing disturb thee, nothing affright thee. All things are passing. God never changes. Patient endurance attaineth to all things. Who God possesseth, this In nothing is wanted. Alone, God suffices. Thank you all so much for being here today. I really, really enjoyed being with you. And I give thanks for your faith and for your knowledge and for your work on those issues in the church. Thank you.
And thank you, Lindsay, for being
Thank
here
you.
with us today and guiding us in some just incredible presentation and conversation. It was a joy to
you.
be with you.
Yeah.